Racist cops arrested a black man at rest stop. Next day, he's the judge presiding over their hearing. Not everyone knows when a day will change their entire life. And sometimes, a civil rights violation begins with nothing more than a suspicious glance aimed at a black man in too nice of a car. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. At 10:03 a.m., Arlo Carter, a 58-year-old black man, nearly 6'3", with a firm build and composed demeanor, gently steered his 2023 Lincoln Continental Reserve into rest stop 212, a modest roadside area along Interstate 94, about 42 miles west of Lansing, Michigan. There was nothing remarkable about the place. A few worn-out vending machines, 4 wooden picnic tables skewed by the wind, and a parking lot typically occupied by truck drivers and weary travelers, stopping to stretch their legs or check their GPS. Arlo pulled over, turned off the engine, and took out his old smartphone to check directions to the Capitol building. He had an important appointment today, a statewide judicial policy meeting with Governor Lydia Holtz, scheduled for noon, where he would present a 76-page proposal on reforming arrest procedures, eliminating racial bias in law enforcement, and restoring trust between police and communities of color. The sleek black Lincoln he was driving wasn't a rental. It was a gift from his younger brother, a successful entrepreneur in Atlanta, in celebration of Arlo's 20th year as a judge in Michigan's 14th District Court. The license plate was custom-made for senior judicial officials, embossed with the code MI-14-bench. But Arlo was used to the fact that such signs were never enough to silence suspicion when the person behind the wheel was black. As he studied his route, suddenly, the piercing wail of a police siren tore through the quiet. A Michigan State Police Ford Explorer cruiser screeched to a halt behind his vehicle, red and blue lights flashing rapidly, startling a few people around the rest stop. Some truckers stepped down from their cabs to see what was happening, but only one man emerged from the cruiser, a white officer in uniform. Officer Brian, likely in his 40s, average build, eyes narrowed with scrutiny. He carried no ticket book, no warrant, only instinct and a prejudice long ingrained. Arlo rolled down his window out of habit, both hands remaining on the wheel, just as he had always taught his law students. When you're black and pulled over, don't let a single gesture be misinterpreted. "Good morning, officer," he said gently. "Is there something I can help you with?" But Brian didn't respond. He looked around the car's interior, cream-colored leather, a tablet neatly resting on the passenger seat, a dark brown leather briefcase embossed in silver letters with the name Judge Arlo L. Carter. Without asking a question, Brian raised his hand to the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Requesting backup," he said flatly. "Black male, Lincoln Continental. Possible connection to theft at Dixon's gas station 10 minutes ago. Vehicle parked at rest stop 212. Arlo slowly turned his head toward the rearview mirror. In his eyes, there was no fear, only a cold familiarity. After years on the bench, he had heard hundreds of defenses from people arrested simply for resembling someone else. He never thought it would be his turn. But he knew this much. When a black man is suspected, not for what he's done, but simply for existing, justice has already cracked at its foundation. And the clock on the dashboard ticked forward, 10:04, as fate began to count down. Officer Brian walked slowly toward the Lincoln, his polished leather boots thudding against the sun-heated asphalt of the rest stop parking lot. A gentle breeze rustled the Rest Stop 212 sign, but it did nothing to ease the tension thickening in the air. Just a few steps away from the vehicle, the officer's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing every detail on the face of the black man sitting calmly behind the wheel. A composed man, with salt and pepper hair, hands neatly placed on the steering wheel, as if fully aware that every movement could be misinterpreted. "Is this your car?" Brian asked, his voice no longer a question but laced with suspicion, like a verdict already passed. "I can provide the registration if needed," Arlo replied, his gaze steady, his tone composed to a startling degree. But Brian didn't reach for the documents. Instead, he stepped back half a pace and barked, "Out of the car! No more talking!" Arlo blinked once, not out of fear, but because he sensed the familiar arc of a scenario that had played out too many times for men like him, where courtesy is seen as a shield and civil rights are shortened by personal bias. At that moment, a second cruiser pulled in. Officer Reich, a white female officer in her 20s, stepped out with lighter steps, her eyes quickly scanning the scene. She had graduated from the Michigan Police Academy just 14 months earlier, and this was only her second time dispatched for a suspicious individual backup call. "Is there a problem here?" Reich asked, but Brian didn't answer. He was already leaning into Arlo's car, reaching for the glove compartment, searching for anything to confirm his bias. "I do not consent to a search without a warrant," Arlo said, his voice still clear, even, and unwavering. "You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." That sentence made Brian pause, but only for a split second. He turned, face flushed red, and shouted, "Obstructing an officer!" Without hesitation, Brian yanked the car door wider and grabbed Arlo's left wrist, twisting it sharply behind his back. The sound of metal echoed as the handcuffs locked into place. Reich hesitated, but eventually stepped forward to secure the other wrist, even though confusion was visible in her eyes. Arlo didn't resist. He simply looked toward the row of trees on the far side of the rest stop, where a few trucks idled, and the sound of radio static floated in the wind. In his eyes was exhaustion, not from this moment, but from the repetition. He had heard countless stories like this in his courtroom, from young black men stopped without cause, searched, humiliated. But this time, he was the one wearing the cuffs. In the far corner of the lot, a journalism junior named Rachel Long from the University of Michigan stood next to her blue Subaru. She began filming with her phone when she saw the Lincoln surrounded. The video lasted less than 30 seconds, but it captured everything clearly. An older black man, well-dressed, being handcuffed without resistance, quietly asking, "What did I do wrong?" As Brian pushed Arlo toward the patrol vehicle, neither of them knew the video would be viewed over 2 million times within 8 hours. Nor did they realize that the man they had just humiliated in public was someone with enough power to overturn an entire system and etch the names Brian and Reich into a very different chapter of Michigan's judicial history. And so, from an unwarranted suspicion, an unlawful act was justified with a single wrist twit, triggering a chain of events no one could have foreseen. The sound of police boots striking the concrete echoed clearly through the stillness of the rest stop. Arlo Carter was led away, both wrists tightly secured behind his back by cold steel cuffs, sunlight reflecting off the gold watch on his wrist, a commemorative gift from the Michigan State Judicial Council. But now, it carried no weight under the gaze of prejudice fixed upon him. Around him, not a word was spoken. There were only glances, some confused, others skeptical, and many averted, as if unwilling to get involved. An elderly man, dressed in a faded olive military jacket, held his wife's hand and whispered, "The way he walks. That's not a criminal. I served for 20 years, and that look in his eyes is one of someone who's sacrificed for this country." A few steps away, Rachel, the college student who had started recording earlier, was still filming every moment. Her hands trembled slightly, but her phone held steady. She knew that in this moment, her device was more than a tool, it was a witness. Reich, standing behind Brian, began to sense something was deeply wrong. In Arlo's eye, there was no fear, no defiance, only a quiet disappointment, as if he had seen this scene play out hundreds of times. just never imagined he would be the one in it. Yet Reich said nothing. It was only her 4th patrol shift, and the first time her throat tightened over an order she didn't truly believe in. The cruiser turned left and merged onto the highway, heading toward the Jackson Police Headquarters, 13.7 miles away, about a 15-minute drive. Inside the car, no one spoke. Brian kept both hands on the wheel, eyes focused as though he were driving through a snowstorm, even though the skies were clear. Reich glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Arlo sitting upright, head tilted slightly, eyes gazing out the window as trees rushed past. But in his mind, a stream of images played, cases he had ruled on, testimonies from young black men saying they were targeted just for looking suspicious. He had once thought, we must do better. But this morning, he understood how far we still had to go. At the Jackson station, the clock struck 10:48. The iron door opened, white fluorescent light beaming down onto the dull, scuffed tile floor. Arlo was led down a long hallway, past reception desks and administrative offices. A desk officer turned, nodded toward him, and muttered to a colleague. Another one pretending to be a bank executive or some doctor. See the Rolex? The other chuckled. Probably fake. Brian gave a brief statement to the duty officer. Suspicion of connection to a stolen vehicle. Subject refused to cooperate. Obstructed official duty. The words were typed quickly into the system, with no verification of the documents Arlo had previously offered. His ID, a state-issued judicial badge, was brushed aside along with his leather wallet, left sitting on the cold metal desk like some decorative object nobody bothered to examine. Arlo was placed in a temporary holding cell, white-painted brick walls, a single cold plastic chair, no windows, no clock. The room was kept at roughly 64 degrees Fahrenheit, just enough to make him pull his shoulders in against the chill. Every passing minute felt like a slap to his dignity, not merely for being treated as a suspect, but because the very system he had believed in was now turning its back on him. Outside, the governor's office began calling repeatedly. Arlo hadn't arrived. No email, no response. A policy meeting with the State Justice Reform Commission, bringing together more than 23 officials, was now in limbo due to a silence no one could explain. And in that room, Arlo Carter, who had presided over more than 15,000 hearings and signed off on 42 legislative reform proposals, was now reduced to the black man in a fancy car under suspicion. An invisible label, yet powerful enough to strip away every title, every honorific, and every credential he had built over a lifetime. And the second hand on the clock kept ticking forward, drawing closer to the moment when justice would be publicly humiliated. Inside a cold holding cell, the fluorescent light cast a pale glow on Arlo Carter's skin, making him appear even more ashen. He sat on an old, white plastic chair, his back slightly resting against the wall, eyes fixed on a two-way mirror in front of him, where he knew someone was watching. There was no clock, no phone, no sense of time except for the slow ticking in his mind. But it was the silence that made the room feel suffocating. Arlo had requested to make a phone call 3 times, each time clear, polite, and by the book. I request to contact the 14th District Court Office or my legal representative. But each time, he received the same response, like a broken tape recorder. Hold on. We're busy. One officer walking by even shrugged. Everyone wants to call, pal. A young officer, barely a year into the force, brushed past and nudged his colleague. See that watch? That model's at least 10 grand. Gotta be a scammer. The other snorted. Looks like one of those finance guys from Chicago trying to stir up trouble. None of them stopped to ask who he was. They didn't need to. To them, the suit was just a disguise. It was the color of his skin that defined guilt. Brian passed by the hallway at least 4 times. Each time he glanced into the cell, his look was no longer just contempt, it carried provocation, as if waiting for a reaction. But Arlo didn't give him that. He simply sat, his gaze distant, as though detaching from reality. Reich stood 2 doors down. She glanced over, then quickly turned away, fast and quiet. For the first time in her short career, she felt a kind of inner conflict she couldn't name. She didn't know anything about the man, but something in his demeanor, the way he didn't yell, didn't panic, unsettled her. On Arlo's wrist, the cuff marks had turned a faint purple, deep impressions visible against his dark skin. The only sounds in the room now were the low hum of the fan and the clicking of keyboards from the administrative area every time the door opened briefly. A records intake officer, blonde, wearing headphones, listening to a podcast, called out toward the room, "State occupation." Arlo answered, not loudly, but with unmistakable clarity. "Judge." The man chuckled softly and turned to a colleague, probably another fake professor. Then he typed into the occupation field on the computer. None verified. In the internal database system, the AI-powered identity assistant immediately flashed an orange alert. Alert, identity match. Carter, Arlo L. Judge, Michigan 14th District. Security clearance, level 3. But the pop-up was closed within 2 seconds. "Why?" a desk officer muttered dismissively. "System bugged again. Flagged that delivery guy yesterday, too." While the system rejected the truth, outside, the internet was already waking up. The video posted by student Rachel on TikTok was only 47 seconds long, but it had already surpassed 100,000 views in 2 hours. The hashtag #man in cuffs appeared first, followed by #Michigan Justice and #dignity detained. No one knew the name of the man in the video yet, but the image of him in handcuffs, standing tall, eyes unwavering, had touched thousands, including lawyers, activists, and veterans. At the governor's office, the communications assistant had called Judge Arlo Carter 3 times. No answer. In the meeting room, his seat remained empty. A small nameplate reading, "Honorable Arlo L. Carter," stood alone on the oak conference table. Meanwhile, in the Jackson holding cell, the very justice system he had once served was becoming increasingly foreign, cold, and blind. No violence, no guns needed, just enough indifference, and even a man like him could become no one. And in that seemingly meaningless silence, something was growing. Outrage, not from him, but from outside these holding cell walls. At 11:52 a.m., Sergeant Jade Harmon pushed open the metal door of the Jackson Police Headquarters, stepping in with the air of someone seasoned by decades of field work, her outer coat still carrying the dust of a morning site inspection. At 53, she was one of the most senior female officers in the Michigan State Police system, with over 31 years of service, from district patrol officer to inter-county checkpoint supervisor. Jade was not someone easily swayed by emotion, but neither was she someone who overlooked irregularities. She walked past the holding area, which housed 3 single cells. Her gaze paused when she noticed a black man sitting upright, hands resting calmly on his thighs, eyes fixed on the opposite wall. Not fearful, not angry, just silent, composed in a way that felt unusually resolute. Something about him made her stop. He wasn't like the usual suspects. It wasn't just the way he dressed. Dark suit, deep blue tie, polished leather shoes. It was his posture, his presence. "Who is that man?" she asked the duty officer. "Been here since this morning, over 2 hours. Reason: obstruction." The car matched the description of Dixon's theft. Name's Arlo Carter. Jade frowned. That name rang in her mind like a bell-striking memory. "Arlo Carter," she repeated, more slowly this time. She turned on her heel and headed straight into the administrative office, sitting down at the internal investigations terminal, a system she rarely had to use herself. Logging in with her command-level credentials, she quickly typed into the search bar, Arlo L. Carter. In just 1.7 seconds, the full profile appeared. Presiding Judge, 14th District Court, Michigan. Term, 22 years. Degrees, Yale Law School, Georgetown University. Legal security clearance, Level 3, authorized for federal system access. A portrait photo filled the screen. A suit, a gentle smile, eyes looking directly into the lens. The very man now sitting in their holding cell. A young officer passing by caught sight of the screen, halted. He's a judge? Jade didn't answer. She stood up. Her eyes shifted to a steely focus. Walking down the hallway, her leather shoes struck rhythmic clacks against the concrete floor, each step echoing off the ceiling. Staff on both sides stopped what they were doing. No one spoke, but everyone could feel the tension rising. A sergeant like Jade never got angry without reason, unless a serious breach had occurred. Why did no one verify his ID? Her voice rang out, sharp as a blade. Silence. Brian stood at the far end of the hall, just about to speak, when Jade turned and strode toward him. Do you have his ID? Yes. But I thought... You thought, Jade cut in. Your job is to verify, not to assume, especially not when someone is carrying a state judiciary badge. Brian's face drained of color. He stammered. He wasn't acting like a judge. He didn't say. He gave his name, Arlo Carter. And with one data entry, one glance at a photo, you could have known exactly whose hands you put those cuffs on. Jade turned to Reich, still standing a few meters away, her expression tight with worry. You assisted in the arrest? Reich nodded faintly, barely able to speak. Did you check his ID? No, Sergeant. The air felt frozen in place. Jade turned her gaze back toward the holding cell, where Arlo still sat unmoved, like a statue. Now, she understood clearly. This wasn't just a procedural error. This was the vivid manifestation of a system steeped in bias, irresponsibility, and teetering on the brink of losing public trust. She exhaled heavily, her hand tightening around the file folder. Prep a vehicle. Get Judge Carter out of here. Now. Then she turned to the administrative officer. And inform the governor's office immediately. One more minute of delay is one more minute tarnishing the honor of this department. And just like that, within minutes, the tide turned. Not through yelling or tragedy, but by one clear-eyed reckoning with the truth. One person recognizing a mistake and having the courage to correct it began to unravel a chain of failures no one had thought to question. But this was only the beginning. Ahead was a far greater wave, when the public, the media, and the entire political structure would come to learn. A judge had been handcuffed, and no one even bothered to verify his name. The cell door opened, and for the first time in over 2 hours, Arlo Carter lifted his head to see a face not masked by suspicion or indifference. Sergeant Jade stepped in, her gaze no longer sharp, but transformed into a silence heavy with reflection. In her hand was the key to handcuff number 2, a small symbol that now carried the full weight of admitting a grave mistake. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Arlo remained seated, his hands still cuffed behind his back, the overhead light casting shadows across his shoulders like those of a solitary soldier. Jade knelt. She didn't call anyone for help, and personally unlocked each cuff from his wrists. When the second click sounded, it wasn't just the sound of metal releasing. It was the crack in a system that had let prejudice steer its course. Judge Carter, Jade said, her voice lowered. I'm sorry. This was a serious mistake, not just procedural, but a completely unacceptable insult. Arlo gently rotated his wrists, the red marks now darkened, but he didn't show anger. He simply replied calmly, I need to be in Lansing. I'm 18 minutes late. At that moment, outside, Officer Bryan was still scrambling to gather the shards of his arrogance. He stepped to the cell door and muttered, "He never said he was a judge." Jade turned, her eyes sharp as a blade. "He presented a valid ID, and I believe you know how to verify. You chose not to." "I didn't mean to. Intentional or not," Jade interrupted. "It's still abuse of power." Turning to Reich, she asked for a full account. Every word, every action, every moment from when they first approached Arlo to the time he was brought to the station. Reich lowered her head, the look of regret now clearly visible for the first time. I'm not sure. I just followed the command. I didn't check his ID. I think I should have checked." "You should have," Jade responded, not harshly, just with the steady finality of a truth laid bare. "And now you'll file an official report. I'm ordering an internal review immediately. Pull all footage from cruiser units 407 and 423. Minutes later, an unmarked police vehicle was dispatched, not to detain Arlo Carter, but to deliver him to the state capitol. In Jade's hand was a secured phone. She dialed the governor's office. When the line picked up, she spoke just one sentence. "We've uncovered a serious breach. Judge Carter is en route to Lansing. Extend our direct apology from Jackson." At that same moment, in a small apartment in Ann Arbor, student Rachel, the one who recorded the video at the rest stop, was trembling as she watched her TikTok view count jump from 1.3 million to 3.2 million in just 47 minutes. Beneath the clip were thousands of comments, ranging from outrage to heartbreak. Unbelievable. His composure was beyond heroic. No one is safe when those in power are left unchecked. Then came a tweet that shook the political landscape of Michigan, posted by State Representative Laura Hernandez. If a sitting state judge can be handcuffed in broad daylight, at a rest stop, without cause or verification, then who among us is truly a free citizen? The tweet received over 74,000 shares in 2 hours. On local television, the noon broadcast cut into the regular news program. The anchor stated, "We've just received word that a state judge was mistakenly detained this morning by Michigan State Police. The incident is now going viral on social media and will be examined more closely in our 5 p.m. report." In Jackson, no one dared to joke or pass casual judgment anymore. The officers who once ignored Arlo Carter's voice now couldn't even look each other in the eye. A name that had seemed anonymous in the haze of a quiet morning had become the focal point of a national conversation in under 3 hours. And as the vehicle carrying Arlo rolled toward Lansing, its headlights swept across the iron pillars of police headquarters, where an old banner still hung. Justice, accountability, respect. That slogan today was, for the first time, cast under the true light of what it demands. At 12:31 p.m., the unmarked police vehicle quietly pulled up along the south side of the Michigan State Capitol. The rear door opened, and Arlo Carter stepped out. No reporters, no sirens, but everything from the way he walked to the look in his eyes made the 2 security officers nearby instinctively stand at attention. On the 3rd-floor hallway, room 312 was already packed. 17 members of the State Judicial Committee, 5 policy strategists, and more than 40 guest delegates from civil society organizations. On the table sat a thick stack of files detailing proposed reforms for law enforcement, a meeting scheduled over 3 months ago. But no one was focused on the pages anymore. When Arlo entered, the entire room rose to its feet, not out of courtesy, not for his title, but because after the seismic events of that morning, he entered not as a judge, but as living evidence of the quiet decay within the very justice system he had once protected. The suit he wore, the same from the morning, was slightly wrinkled at the back, where it had been pressed against a cell bench and pulled tight when he was cuffed. But his posture remained straight, chin raised. No one spoke until Governor Lydia Holtz, the most powerful woman in the state, nodded at him and said in a soft but resolute voice, "We know what happened. Please speak." Arlo didn't need to open his briefcase. He had no notes. He walked to the podium, placed both hands on the polished wood, and looked at each person in the room. "I was arrested this morning," he began, "not for speeding, not for making threats, but because I was a black man alone in a luxury car." The room fell silent as if the air had been drained. Arlo paused, then looked toward the technician, signaling for the video to play. On the large screen behind him, footage from Rest Stop 212 began to roll. The image showed him, in a suit, saying nothing, as Officer Bryan handcuffed him while he calmly stated, "I haven't done anything wrong." In the corner of the screen was a small caption, "Filmed by Rachel Long, University of Michigan." The audio cut off as the clip ended with him being pushed into a patrol car. A young legislator, Assemblywoman Kira Monroe, 34, lowered her head, arms wrapped tightly around a folder. She had spoken at many hearings about racial injustice, but now she couldn't find the words to respond. Quietly, she wiped a tear, then looked up, directly at him. "I'm not telling this story to claim special privileges," Arlo continued. "I'm telling it as a warning. If it can happen to me, a sitting judge, with full credentials on the governor's schedule, it has already been happening every day to those who have no titles to shield them." Every sentence, every word echoed in the dead quiet room. He didn't need a microphone. It was as if each individual was being personally called to account. "Justice cannot come with exceptions," he concluded, "and it cannot be built on biased instincts. No one is born with a default presumption of guilt because of their skin color." Immediately following his speech, Governor Holtz signaled to her policy advisor, "All previous plans, from budgets to clause amendments for patrol procedures, were swept aside. We need an emergency session," she said, "right now." The entire meeting schedule was overhauled within 15 minutes. New topic: addressing racial bias in law enforcement. A prepared motion was introduced, proposing the formation of an independent subcommittee to investigate misconduct during law enforcement procedures. The Michigan State Judicial Committee, in a swift follow-up vote, passed the motion by a margin of 16-1 to initiate a full internal investigation into the Jackson Police Department, and appointed Judge Arlo Carter to preside over a special hearing on the incident, in a role both objective and legally independent. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. That morning, Arlo Carter had been handcuffed like a suspect. By afternoon, he became the person leading the inquiry into the misconduct of those who tried to silence him. No one in that room, including Arlo himself, could have predicted that the meeting would become the defining moment of a new era of criminal justice reform in the state of Michigan. But that's how truth works. It doesn't need a spotlight, only someone calm enough to stand firm when the system veers off course. 3 days after the incident that shook public opinion, the Jackson County Courthouse, normally quiet and only crowded during major criminal trials, suddenly became the center of national attention. More than 800,000 people tuned in to watch the unprecedented hearing titled Rest Stop Misconduct, a session convened to clarify the procedural violations committed by 2 officers who wrongfully arrested a state judge. 6 additional broadcast cameras were installed in the courtroom. The sound system was upgraded within just 36 hours, and the public seating area was doubled in size. Reporters packed both sides of the hallway, with dozens of journalists from CNN, NPR, the Detroit Free Press, and independent platforms like ProPublica in full attendance. At the presiding table, Judge Arlo Carter sat in the center, not as the victim, but as the chair of the special hearing, at the direct request of the state governor. To his left sat Michigan Supreme Court Chief Justice Evelyn Rawls. To his right was State Attorney Khalid Monroe, known for his firm stance against police misconduct. The courtroom doors swung open, and the two central figures walked in. Officer Bryan, walking upright but pale-faced, eyes fixed on the floor. Beside him was Officer Reich, visibly tense, her hand clutching a folder tightly. Each had their legal counsel. The seats they took were no longer seats of authority, but of those under justice's scrutiny. The opening portion of the hearing lasted nearly 45 minutes. The state attorney played footage taken from patrol car dash cams. One clip from Cruiser 423 clearly showed Bryan approaching Mr. Carter's vehicle. No greeting, no request for documents. And in less than 48 seconds from initial contact, he ordered, "Step out of the vehicle." There was no evidence of a license plate check or a lookup of the vehicle registration. The next video showed Reich standing about 2 meters away, watching her colleague pull Arlo from the car and cuff him without intervening or offering input. Violation of Ethics Code. Section 7.4, duty to intervene when witnessing excessive conduct, Attorney Monroe noted. "Officer Bryan," Arlo asked, his tone not raised, but each word sharp. "Did you read the Miranda rights to the person you arrested?" Bryan pressed his lips together, offering no answer. "Did you receive a search warrant for the vehicle?" "No." "Did you examine the judicial ID card that Mr. Carter presented?" "I didn't think to." The room fell into heavy silence as Arlo posed the final question. "If Mr. Carter had been a state Supreme Court justice, what would you have done?" Bryan looked up, his eyes confused like a child caught in a lie. "I don't know. I didn't think of that possibility." The silence now was no longer just tension. It was a condemnation heavier than any physical evidence. In the public's eyes, nothing revealed bias more than those stammered words. Reich, when her turn came, took full responsibility. "I didn't dare to say that something felt wrong, and that's inexcusable." She choked up, unable to find justification. At the end of the 5-hour and 11-minute hearing, Arlo delivered a closing statement of just 36 words, but they rang powerfully. "We do not conduct hearings for revenge, but to restore the trust you've just broken." The committee's vote was swift. Immediate unpaid suspension for both officers. A comprehensive review of 57 arrest records they had participated over the past 3 years. Temporary revocation of Field Patrol authority, pending conclusions from the Office of the Attorney General. Outside, hundreds of residents stood in silence, watching via the live broadcast projected onto Jackson Square. No one clapped, no one cheered. Only silence, heavy but profound, as if after countless times justice had been ignored, this time it had spoken. And in the very center of that silence stood a man, once deemed a suspicious subject, now restoring the definition of justice, piece by piece, not through anger, but through unwavering integrity. Less than 72 hours after the explosive hearing in Jackson, a wave of reactions had spread across the state of Michigan, like an underground surge breaking free after years of quiet pressure. No one had anticipated that a wrongful arrest, even of a judge, could possess the power to shift the deeply entrenched and conservative structure of the policing system. But it was precisely Arlo Carter's calm silence and unwavering resilience that ignited that change. On the 4th day, 6 police departments in Michigan, including Detroit, Ann Arbor, Flint, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, and Lansing, proactively sent official statements to the State Department of Justice, committing to a comprehensive internal review of arrest procedures, officers' duty to intervene, and compliance with Ethics Rule 7.4 on the obligation to protect human rights. It was an unprecedented move, self-auditing from within rather than waiting for outside investigations. An emergency petition initiated by a student law group at the University of Michigan gathered over 150,000 signatures within 48 hours. The petition called for mandatory, comprehensive training on racial bias awareness for all new and active police officers across the state. Many who signed included personal testimonies. I was once stopped for matching a description when I was just walking home. Governor Lydia Holtz ensured that actions would not stop at promises. In a press conference at Capitol Plaza, she announced Emergency Executive Order Number 22-MJ-004, establishing the Michigan State Police Conduct Oversight Commission, an independent body with real-time access to all body cam footage and the authority to demand investigations into any breaches of lawful intervention protocols. It was a reform long demanded by social justice advocates since 2016, repeatedly delayed until now. Meanwhile, 38 arrest cases handled by Officer Bryan over the past 3 years were suspended for review. Among them, 9 involved unlawful searches, 5 lacked Miranda warnings, and 3 involved detainees who had never been granted access to legal counsel within the first 48 hours. As for Reich, the young officer who had stood silently during the misconduct, she did something few officers ever dare. She appeared on local television, publicly apologized, and submitted a formal request to transfer out of the force. I didn't speak up when I should have. I chose silence to protect my position instead of protecting justice. I take full responsibility. Arlo, for his part, declined every interview request from major outlets, from CBS to MSNBC, including 60 Minutes. He accepted only one invitation to speak at a closed seminar with law students at Wayne State University. And the one sentence he left behind, widely shared across social media, was, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just chose not to collapse when pushed into the dark." Within a week, Arlo received over 8,000 handwritten letters from across the United States. One came from a single mother in Mississippi who wrote, "Thank you for not screaming, yet still making the entire nation listen." Another came from a white veteran in Montana. "For the first time, I saw the system I once served could be wrong, and I accept that truth because of you." One letter in particular moved Arlo deeply. It came from a 15-year-old teenager in Flint, signed only as Malcolm. "I've never seen a black person speak to the whole state and be heard by white people like that. Now, I believe, my voice matters too." Arlo's story became a case study in 12 law schools, from the University of Michigan to Yale. In the course on Dignity and Rule of Law, the lesson was titled, "Justice is not a building, but how we treat people." In Detroit, a group of young adults, all under 25, founded a nonprofit called the Arlo Justice Corps, providing legal aid for wrongfully arrested individuals, especially people of color and those without legal representation. They called him the Pathfinder, even though he had never set foot in their office. Arlo did not seek the spotlight. He simply returned to his old office at the 14th District Court, quietly working through backlogged cases. But this time, every gaze in the courthouse no longer held just respect, but admiration for a man who overturned prejudice not with the bang of a gavel, but with the most powerful silence in the modern history of Michigan's justice system. 3 months after the hearing that shook Michigan's judicial system, the light of change began to seep into places long accustomed to darkness. At the Michigan Police Academy, a new training program was officially introduced. Gone were the dry hours of tactical theory. For the first time in the Academy's history, cadets were required to complete 40 hours of racial bias awareness and 16 hours of nonviolent crisis intervention training. The opening ceremony of the first course was held on Monday at 9 a.m. on the expansive western campus in Lansing. On a modest yet dignified stage, Arlo Carter, the once unwilling victim of the very system he had long served, was invited as the honorary speaker. Initially, he declined. But when he learned that 19 new cadets were people of color, the highest number in a single class since 1994, he reconsidered. Arlo stepped up to the podium amid applause that wasn't thunderous, but was deeply respectful. He wore a light gray suit, no medals, no symbols of authority, except the calm in his gaze and the invisible marks still etched on his left wrist. His speech lasted exactly 7 minutes and 42 seconds, shorter than all the speeches before it. Yet each sentence, each word, seemed to engrave itself into the minds of those listening. You are not just keepers of the law, you are guardians of dignity. Dignity isn't in a badge. It lies in how you treat the most vulnerable when no one is watching. No one is born biased, but everyone can choose to act without it. There were no slides, no statistics, only the presence of a man who had once been diminished but never lost himself. When the Q&A began, a young white cadet named Connor Vance stood up, his voice slightly trembling. "Do you forgive them, sir?" Arlo looked directly at him, nodded gently. "I don't need forgiveness to move on. I just need them not to repeat it. Forgiveness doesn't replace reform." The room fell silent, not from pain, but from the raw truth of it, and the unmistakable clarity of hope. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, a young soldier in a Navy uniform approached Arlo, stood tall, and gave him a formal military salute. "We'll do better, sir." Arlo placed a hand gently on his shoulder. It wasn't a blessing. It was a passing of the torch, of responsibility, of conscience, and a spiritual legacy written in no textbook. As he stepped out of the grand hall, the early season sunlight cast long shadows across the white stone steps beneath his feet. The American flag flapped vigorously in the breeze, and for the first time, Arlo didn't see it as a symbol of pretense, but as the unfinished potential of a nation still learning how to face itself. He paused at the flagpole, not out of formality, but to feel it, no longer thinking of sirens, metal cuffs, or contemptuous stares. Arlo remembered only what he had held on to: composure, resolve, and the belief that justice does not need to shout to be heard. In the distance, a local news crew was quietly filming him as he looked toward the flag. They didn't approach. No questions. Just silent footage. The clip later aired during prime time, with white text fading in against a black screen. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It only needs one person who won't give up, one day without kneeling, and one gaze that doesn't lower. And just like that, the story of Arlo Carter didn't end. It began to live on in thousands of other people he never met, but changed, not by raising a fist, but by holding his ground with unwavering courage in the face of wrong. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see how the fight continues.